matter a lot now, honey. Plenty of cake for everyone, you say. Try to get out of bed with lines on my face. I'm such a disgrace, oh yeah. Tried to contain it. I didn't mean to start a war. You can point your pistol at me, but I'm
Allô, cher.
could draw. Na, na, na. Who's gonna feed me? Now I've broken all the plates.
Allô, maman.
Who's gonna love me? Who's gonna love me? I am all the mess. I am all the mess. I am all the mess. I am. I am all the mess. I am all the mess. I am all the mess. I am.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in today. You're listening to The Mess. This is my new song about anxiety and depression. Having a showdown. Hey, Sarah. Sarah, you're so great for tuning in every day. Thank you so much. We're going to be talking to Cindy Doire today. I'll let her introduce herself, but she's a very good friend of mine and a brilliant human being. And she's taken a leap this year from music into a different form of art. And I'll let her tell you all about it. I'm really excited for today's show because we're going to get a little bit more into the science of mental health. Water check. I highly recommend watching these shows, or even you don't even have to watch them because they're kind of like visual podcasts. But put your gym jams on. I got my new jogging pants on. Business on the top, comfort on the bottom. It's the time of COVID. It's how we are right now. Anything goes, I think. I am all the mess. I'm all the mess. So are you, perhaps. Maybe that's why you're here. Thank you so much for tuning in to our 5th out of 6 mental health talks this week for Mental Illness Awareness Week. I'm going to tap Cindy in here and excited for you to meet Cindy. You her already from her wonderful career in music. Allô, ma chère.
Hi,
Comment ça va?
ça va bien, toi?
Good. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm stoked that after my long week, I get to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to hear about what you're learning at school. So tell everybody who you are. What's your story?
Oh my God. Well, I always like to think of Trisha Foster when somebody says like, oh, what do you do? And I think about the time where she sent me a TED talk about multi-potentialites, because it's a term that I love for people like yourself, Mel, and me, which is like, I do a lot of things. Currently, I mean, I do taxes. I'm a yoga teacher. I play music. I'm a mom, and I tool leather. And currently, I am doing a master's program in arts counseling psychology. So that's obviously taking up a lot of my time at the moment. So I guess I'm just like a curious person that likes to, express and ask questions. I'm a student for life.
Yeah. So this what made you decide that you were going to take the leap, I guess, from playing music full time to going back to school?
Well, I think that we're all kind of at a place right now where we're probably all asking ourselves a lot of questions, and there's so many unknowns. And I mean, I love school. Fall, like after I finish my university, September always brings this sense of like, oh, I get to go buy new pens and go back to school. And it's just been like, no, you're done that. And so I kind of was always excited to go back to school. But I think with, I mean, we've talked a lot about mental health and the importance of, self-care and, asking ourselves questions. And I think with the music scene, I certainly have put myself to, I've pushed myself to my limits more than once. And I've certainly found myself in chapters in my life where I had to really turn to tools, like internal tools that were going to help me through whatever it was that I was struggling with. And with those chapters come, like inquisition and a lot of information about, oh, okay, well, that's what's happening physically to me. I've done a lot of yoga training, studying, and I think that really opened up, my world to, a lot of the stuff. I did a specialization in trauma and grief, and then I also had a baby, and like prenatal yoga and just like the transformation, like you basically never meet the same person twice. And also, like, there are 7 billion perspectives on this planet. No two people would ever, live the same experience. So I just have a lot of interest in that and understanding human behavior. And it's been really empowering just to kind of dive into this and find out things about, oh, that's why we function like that.
Little bing aha moment.
Yeah. And of course, like with the ladies in waiting and with like a lot of stuff, like I do want to, host retreats and use the music and the arts and healing through the arts, through expression. And as once I'm done my program as a psychotherapist, I hope that I'll be better equipped to deal with the emotions that we kind of stir up in those workshops and in those retreats. So I think I just want to have the tools to better, guide people through those moments post, whatever it is that we're hoping to dig up in those workshops,
Good on you for adding your goodness to the world. You're one of my favorite people to begin with, but it doesn't surprise me at all that you would go down this path, because you're such an open, light-hearted, very multi thought. You're not just someone who's like, this is my way or the highway, but like you really take into account how other people feel, and people feel that when they talk to you. So, which is kind of why when we spoke the other day, I was like, Cindy, I had a freaking breakdown. And I did. Last week, I had an absolute breakdown. Somebody hit my car mirror, and that set off a chain of events. And looking back at it now, I kind of find it funny. But when I was standing on a bar stool in my bedroom with one hand holding my curtain rod and the other arm up against the wall because I was bawling my eyes out and having a panic attack in my underwear. Now I find that funny, but it certainly wasn't funny at the time, but I needed to do that. And then we had a conversation maybe a couple days later, and you were telling me about your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system. And that just struck a chord, which made me say like, hey, Cindy, do you want to tell people about this? Because I think this is really important information to know how your body is working from a physiological, scientific perspective. Let's talk about what you told me the other day.
Yeah, and it is empowering information because, our bodies, our minds, our thoughts are connected to how our bodies are going to react. So the best way to like break it down simply, if you think about like your stress response, so the autonomic central system, nervous system, it's got the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. So the best analogy is that the sympathetic system is activated and we need it. It's our alarm system, right? It's the reptilian part of the brain that just did I cut off there? Okay. Yeah. Sorry. My sister called. Yeah, it's the part of the brain that alarms us, that tells us that, hey, like we're in trouble. Like you're in the jungle, you're getting chased by a lion and you need to survive. So what happens in that moment is that you go into survival mode, and that's your fight or flight response. And then from that, once that gets activated, then your body's releasing cortisol, adrenaline, and all these other hormones that then activate that, you can now lift a car and throw it over your shoulder because you're going to survive. So it's great that we have this built in our system because it's our survival mechanism. But what's happening for us in our culture is that we are constantly anticipating stress in non-stressful moments. So we are activating the sympathetic system. So like when you think of your stress response, your fight or flight, that's the sympathetic system. So once your body's releasing all of these hormones, you're like, what's happening physically? Like your heart rate is accelerating, right? And you're breathing shallowly, and maybe you're sweating, and you no longer have access to your logic because your brain is not receiving the blood flow anymore. It's going elsewhere. And so you don't function at the same rate that you do when you are activating the parasympathetic. So the parasympathetic is known as the rest or digest sympathetic or nervous system. So that's when do you remember the term in biology class, like homeostatic balance?
Yeah.
Like that was like, I feel like I just finally was reading about that, and I was just laughing because I was like, oh, I haven't thought of that term in like years. And Robert Sapolsky talks about it too. And that's like the ideal state of everything, where there's the right amount of glucose in your bloodstream, and there's the right amount of ideal everything happening in your body. And a stressor is anything that throws you off of that homeostatic balance, right? So back to the parasympathetic, like that's when your body goes back into this healing, this resting, this ability to like all of your organs, everything is functioning. And the exciting thing about the parasympathetic system is that we can activate it, So, and by just taking a deep breath, you're automatically activating your parasympathetic system. We have parasympathetic fibers in our lips. So doing things like in yoga, when there's any humming or ohms, you're activating the parasympathetic. And then there's like, some people talk about like, there's a lot of nerves, like it gets pretty complicated, and I'm still learning this, but with all the sacral nerves that are associated with the parasympathetic, but there's the vagal tone, the vagal nerve. So anything that stimulates that. So massages, human touch, all of the stress management tools that we are taught essentially are activating the parasympathetic system. And once that is activated, the sympathetic system, which is releasing stress hormones all over your body, will shut down. And that is the exciting part, because you know that as soon as you take that deep breath, your body right away is like, oh, okay, we're shifting gears now. And it stops releasing cortisol. It stops releasing all those stress hormones that are flooding your body. So it is empowering information, because it just like, you are the master of what's happening. Your body is listening to your brain always. And I think that's the part that we need to like kind of empower ourselves with, because when you think about your thoughts, and I mean, we are not kind to ourselves, because we are probably, we're the first to criticize. So like just kind of controlling the way, or becoming aware of like certain thoughts that you have, your body is listening, and it's all happening subconsciously. And so I think just empowering yourself by knowing, being aware that everything you say or do is going to have this like physiological response in your body. So that's why a lot of psychotherapy, it's like, well, hang on, let's kind of change the narrative. Let's like, affirmations, all of these things are real. They work because your body is listening to your thoughts and what you're saying. So like when we create those negative neural pathways, and we know negativity is so easy to fall into because it's just easy. Your body automatically imprints the memories when they're negative or when they're emotional. Whereas a positive memory requires a little like more contemplation for it to be recorded in the same way. So that just alone, like we're already set up for failure almost. If you think about how powerful, like as a musician, Mel, like if you play a show and you sing like 1,000 beautiful notes and they're all great, and then you sing that one bad note, like that one bad note is going to haunt you when you get home, and then it's, you know, wake up and you might have that like show hangover feeling of like, oh, what's that feeling? And you're like, oh yeah, I messed up that, or whatever, you know. It's like we see it in our lives, like how powerful these moments can be, and they trump all the good things somehow, right? So it's just like being aware of that, and you have to actively just change your thoughts and change your narrative. So that was a mouthful of a lot of things, but
no, but it's fascinating, you see, because like there are so many self-help books, and then there's, you know, like I think the earliest self-help I remember hearing was like talking about people that had anger management problems, and it was like, okay, count to 10, you know, you're told that as a little kid, count to 10. And then I mean, and then you're there's so many self-help books to read on every different subject, but I don't know that I've been really taking into account that it's a physiological real thing. It's like we're talking hormones, and we're talking, you know, we're talking about your body in a really scientific way, so it does affect your mind. So it's not just like bullshit, count to 10 just so that you kind of like calm down. No, there's something physiological happening in those 10 seconds when you're breathing through your nose. It's fascinating.
yeah, and I feel like also to kind of echo what you just said, when you become aware that there is this like, you know, biological thing happening, it takes away a little bit, because when you're living the emotion, you're in the murky waters in that moment. Like, you know, we were just saying you don't have access to logic. So you live it, everything is amplified through your stress, and we anticipate stress. So we're often sitting there like, you know, it's not like an animal is in the forest stressed out all day because a wolf may show up,
Right.
you know, or whatever. It's like, whereas we anticipate stress and we get ready for it because something may or may not be stressful. And these are all things that like are, you know, they're not life or death for the most part. I mean, of course, there are certain, you know, reactions that totally justify what's happening. And also one thing to take into consideration is that the sympathetic it's like they work together in a really, there's supposed to be a balance and healthy interchange between the two. So when you think about like healthy stress, and like a stress is basically not knowing the future, like fear of the future, like when we think of anxiety and all that. And so, you know, there's some stresses like being on a roller coaster ride, like that's exciting. There's certain factors that are, you know, in our control, so we feel safe putting ourselves there. But then, and or like a scary movie, or even like a dog that's like wrestling, there's like the act of play that is just, the sympathetic system is also activated there. And even in like a sexual dynamic, there's the combination of the parasympathetic, and then that flows into the sympathetic, and then back into the parasympathetic. So like they work well together when it's a nice balance. But when we're talking about stress and anxiety, especially chronic stress, then it doesn't serve us. You know, it's just, and when the sympathetic is overly activated, your immune system is shut down, your reproductive system is shutting down, like all of your digestive system is affected. And these are the things that we all feel when we don't eat properly, we don't sleep properly, our thoughts are keeping us up all at night, you know. So it affects the way we function on every level. Like every cell is living that thought.
Right. Let's sit with that for a second.
No big deal.
No big deal. But I love that you're researching this, and I love that you're, you know, spreading the word about this. And like we said earlier, like to bring it back to the empowerment of like you have you have more authority, you have more power perhaps than you think you do, right?
Oh, you have all the power. This is the thing you do. Like your brain is like the master control that like is speaking to your body, even involuntarily, right? So like even your digestive system is an involuntary process, but it's like its connection with like our body is a civilization. it's it's kind of it is empowering, and I think that like for me when I started, it started with the yoga when I started to really learn about the limbic system, which is like the part that, you know, the alarm system with the amygdala and all the brain stuff. Like I was really fascinated. I just was like, wow, okay, this makes sense. And like the brain has gone through such an evolution that there's some really ancient parts of it, like the reptilian brain. If your psychotherapist has ever mentioned that, like we have these like knee-jerk reactions that are so deeply ingrained in our survival mechanism, and they're meant to be healthy practices, but because of the way, you know, life is these days and the way that the world has evolved to this modern world, like we are, and especially right now during COVID, like we are all fearing the future and the unknowns. And like you and I in our conversation, we were talking about like some of the self-care things that we both do to try to eliminate the unknowns, because like not having control over a situation creates anxiety. And I think, you know, having control is a bit of an illusion, because obviously even, you know, we may feel like we have control over certain factors, but like and that's our safety, and we do. But I think COVID has reminded the entire world that like ultimately, you know, there's a lot of things that we have zero, most things, all things but ourselves, we have no control over. And that is definitely creating a lot of anxiety in the world right now.
Yeah, I think like COVID brain is a real thing. You know, I've noticed it in myself. I've noticed it in other people. And I like that. I like that there's a couple of things happening right now in terms of like a social change where one, we're talking about consent more. Like,
Yeah.
can I be near you? Can I touch you? Can I hug you? Like, these are important boundaries that we need to know how to navigate, and what better way than asking people. And then there's an ice cream truck. I don't know if you can hear that.
I could.
Da, 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 da. See, ice cream. Can ice cream be used?
Yeah, I
Your
guess your
parasympathetic?
parasympathetic system is probably being activated right now by the sound of the ice cream truck.
It's a beautiful thing. But yeah, no, I think there's like there's a lot more understanding, I think, to a certain degree with people right now, when you're saying like, hey, sorry, I forgot to text you back, I've got COVID brain, or like, holy shit, I totally forgot to do that thing that was really important, that was important to me, not just to somebody else, but like I wanted to do this thing and it totally slipped my mind. But are you guys talking about any of that in school right now, of like what's happening currently?
Yeah, we're talking about also like a lot of questions like, hey, do you feel like, you know, we were prepared for this? And right now, like, how were we not prepared? How were we prepared? So it's like part of our discussions when we're learning about other things. It's not like a huge focus on it, but as soon as like, as we're hitting parts of neuroscience or whatever, we somehow apply it, usually in our discussion forums, like, oh, like, you know, it kind of, COVID is just, it's part of the conversation for sure. But yeah, like there is, what's happening, I think, with the COVID brain is that the anxiety, the anxiety and the depression, like if you think about triggers that would cause anxiety and depression, like just a move, losing your job, any kind of change, losing your support, like we are social beings. So like isolation, I mean, everyone should have been feeling a certain amount of, you know, just like a higher frequency. It's kind of like buzzing in everyone's bodies right now, because yeah, we're used to certain comfort zones that we obviously every life as we knew it is gone. So we have to mourn that. And it's hard to accept something like that. And like for me, I don't know about you, but like when things opened up, it took me a while to go back into like trying to shift back up a little bit because we adapt. So, you know, I was trying to like my safe place was this summer at the cottage. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I have to now go and record a track. And like, and I was excited to work, but it certainly took me a little while to kind of like get back into my groove. And I'm still not there. Like I don't feel like I'm functioning at the same rate that you know, that I was before. And of course, anxiety, like we were saying, you don't have access to your logic. You don't, you know, if you have this, all these extra hormones, stress hormones going through your body, like it's going to affect how you see things, your perspective, and how you know, can function.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about how you can, about ways to activate this parasympathetic nervous system, or I think maybe how to maybe make it a habit, or how do you get from like, I know this stuff stresses me out, I got to do it, I'm at this point, I get to this point, I explode, and then later I look back and go, oh, I see the point. Like how do you catch yourself in the moment?
It's really hard because you got to like introduce that you got to interject before you react. So the easiest thing that I think everyone can do starting right now is just like before you react, as you notice like biologically what's happening, your heart rate increases, you know, just taking those deep diaphragmatic breaths, like the first thing, just taking a nice deep breath, and you notice right away, if you check your heartbeat, your heart rate, and you take a deep breath, like right away, you'll notice your heart rate will slow down. So, you know, for me with yoga, like pranayama breathing is an amazing way to activate the parasympathetic system. If you're not into yoga and meditation, just like a walk in the woods, like nature, breathing, being present. There's a lot of the nerves in the neck and cranial. So just giving yourself, like taking a few breaths, massaging the neck all along here, all along the side.
Yeah.
This whole area. So if you kind of just massage that, that's really helpful. If you have a dog, if you have friends in your bubble, like just giving someone a hug will release oxytocin, you know, and activate the parasympathetic nervous system. You know, people basically, anyone who tells you your stress management tools are not right is wrong, because everyone, like whatever brings you to that place, like if you have to visualize something, if there's an image that you turn to that kind of relaxes you and grounds you, you're activating the parasympathetic system. If there's, you know, a song or a person, you know, whatever that gets your senses to kind of relax and grounds you, that is your parasympathetic system being activated. So it can be, I mean, of course, you know, the breath is universal, and yoga and exercise and sleep and you know, diet is super important also. Like there's so many nutrients that we are, you know, supposed to be every day, like how many minerals and how many, you know, like amino acids and this and that. Like it's a big job to stay healthy, and you know, taking supplements and that sort of thing, you know, if you're not you know, if you're lacking in certain minerals, is also something that is really important to, you know, your health. And
Right. I remember when you and I were running workshops with young people, and we kind of traded ideas on our workshops, because it was all kind of based around self-confidence and getting yourself to that place where you can get on stage and you can kind of share who you are through music. And I remember talking to you about spraying perfume or a scent of some sort. And I was like, I do that already. And I do that sometimes before I go to bed. I spray perfume on because it's my like, oh, relax, or you know, essential oils, whatever hip shit I'm into at that time. But yeah, it's interesting that it's not necessary. It can be kind of any sort of stimulation, if you will, that is either, you know, it can be smell, it can be taste, you know. I mean, I guess that's where we run into like there's chocolate ice cream in my fridge, in my freezer ever since March, and it's not the same canister. It's been replaced many times, but there's always one there. And I've started eating it with, because it just gets out of hand. So I've got these tiny little spoons. So now I let myself eat ice cream
See,
because
good for you.
I will get through. If I the bigger it is, I'll get through it in like a couple of days. I'll get through a family size one in a couple of days. I'll like those little Haagen-Dazs ones. That's like one sitting sometimes. So I'm like, okay, take your time, savor it, because it's the comfort that I want. I mean, I like the ice cream, but it's the comfort that I'm looking for, right?
Yeah, and we associate so many different things to that. And I love that you talked about that workshop, because it's like the perfect example of like that balance of the stress, like the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, is kind of what I was talking about with those kids. Because when you think about a performance, like before you go on stage, there's a little bit of stress involved, right? And that's, I mean, it could be like on a scale from 0 to 100, you want to be somewhere in the middle, which kind of shows like, hey, I'm invested, I'm about to do something, I've worked really hard. And like, if you're at 0 on the scale, on the stress scale, then you're not invested, you're detached, you don't care. If you're 100, then you're obviously not on stage because you're probably vomiting backstage and not able to make it on the stage at all. But like finding like that healthy balance of like that stress, but that in a way that it serves you, you know, because like there's an element of that energy that we see in performers, and like sometimes there's an energy about a performer and you don't know what it is, but there's something that is like really reaching you, you know, whereas the performance could be perfect, but there's missing that energy or that investment, you know. So like tapping into that energy is like, it serves us when we can properly manage it.
Right. You mentioned the name of somebody earlier, and I can't remember his name, but you read a book or something about the physiology of stress. Robert Kaminsky.
Oh yeah, I really recommend everybody check Robert Sapolsky. I'll write his name in the comments, but he, when you really want to dive into biology and the stress response, he's an amazing biologist, and he just kind of says it in a way that like is just, first of all, he's hilarious, he's super funny, and he's a wonderful speaker, and he explains the stress response in a really clear and concise way under 2 minutes. So he's just a really wonderful resource. And he's like so passionate about everyone having like taken his biology course, because he feels that every human needs to understand human behavior, because it is definitely, it's empowering to know what your body's doing in those moments, and it does give you a second to add that step that we were talking about, where you can stop and then take that breath, activate the parasympathetic. Like when you know biologically what's happening to your body as you're reacting, you can kind of be like, oh, hang on, maybe I shouldn't talk to this person right now because I'm in a reactive state, as opposed to just plowing ahead forward, full blown emotions and all, which we've all done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key, is like we're here to learn about ourselves. We're here to know who we are, and that to me, that's the meaning of life. That's your lifelong mission. And the more information you can have, the more power you have to be able to do better and more, because you're not having to deal with your itty bitty shitty committee, is what my therapist calls it. It's like, you know, that like voice in your head where it's like always telling you that you're terrible and you're the worst person and there's no way that anybody's going to love you or support you. And so being able to like stop that in that moment, because I think that's a symptom of the sympathetic nervous system as well, you know, working inside you and giving you this like jolt of, you know, run, get out of here, you're worthless kind of thing.
Oh yeah, and our thoughts, right? Like what you were just saying, like you have that voice. It's like, okay, well, you have to act, you know, you have to implement like a talk back or something. Like you got to find something that works for you when those thoughts present themselves. Like, how are you dealing with them? How are you dismissing them? How are you like, you know, regaining control of your thoughts in that moment? And, you know, instead of going down that self-deprecating rabbit hole that can spiral really quickly, right?
Exactly. I'm curious to know what you do, but I'll tell you what I do. I started when I first started meditating. I was living in Australia, and I was meditating on this like rooftop patio, and I did that because it was like the only place that I could have total space and quiet. But I was also meditating facing the sun so that it would force me to close my eyes so I wouldn't get distracted. And I remember like, you know, reading a lot about meditation, and it was like trying really hard to meditate. And I guess something clicked when, you know, and I was kind of like seeing the thoughts that I was having, and I would just name them kind of thing. I'd be like, hey, thought, I see you. And the thought was like, okay, cool. Well, we're just going this way, you know, and the thought was less likely to stop. And take hold of me if I was just like, yeah, yo, ciao, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been doing this sort of same thing with fear, like random stuff, like, you know, driving at night on the highway, like what if there's a deer? Like to a certain degree, yeah, I need to be looking out for that. But when it's taking over my brain, I can feel myself getting more tense. And so I tell myself that's fear. You know, I name it. It's like, there you are. Okay, cool. And I feel like people, everybody just wants to be acknowledged, you know? And to me, so do thoughts, and so do fears. They're like, if you acknowledge them and you name them for what they are, they're perhaps less likely to get their little claws in you and hold on. But I'm curious, what do you have any tricks? What do you do to switch to make the switch?
Well, first of all, like on what you just shared, like that's awesome, and thanks for sharing, because I do that also, and it does, like, I agree with you. I mean, it is a, you know, something that is taught a lot with psychotherapists, and it disarms the thoughts. Like it kind of takes away their power when you can name them, and it adds that logic. So now you're thinking more logically as opposed to emotionally. I mean, I have to say, like, my yoga practice has been my go-to tool. Like I love it. I do it. I try to do my own self-practice daily. And when I don't do it, I feel it. Like when I get busy, and I mean, I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, like there are many moments where it's like, I don't have that time in the day to just like be quiet for an hour. And like, I have Camilla jumping on my back when I'm in downward dog, and that's my meditation, you know? And like, I'm so grateful for the ability to take the time to do that, because it's breath, it's movement, it's letting go. It's, I feel the energy flow from like head to toe when I do a yoga practice. So that's my go-to. But of course I do little things, you know, much like, you know, with the essential oils, I feel like every day I have my little bottle of sandalwood, and patchouli and whatever lavender, and I spray it daily, and it always, you know, throughout the day, that'll be like my little go-to. Or, you know, I try to get outside every day with my daughter. I try to eat well. Like I try to do all of these things, because it's like, it does require a lot of work to stay mentally healthy.
Right. But also in the same breath, it does require a lot of work, but there's also like, you can just do one thing, you know? I know like when I'm anxious, I think of everything that I need to do, and it gets overwhelming because I'm not eating well, and those dishes have been in my freaking sink for almost 5 days now, and it's starting to smell, and like, you know, and I just can't bring myself to do all of the things because my brain says you got to do everything right now. You better get it right, you know? So
Yeah.
it's interesting coming back to the parasympathetic nervous system that like taking one breath.
One breath at a time.
That's
you know?
all you need to do.
Yeah. And when I think about like some of my hardest chapters, it wasn't like, you know, day by day. It was like breath by breath.
Right.
Like go and it really it does, like, being present is a difficult thing. And I think that like for me with COVID, one of the positives is that it's really forced me to try and, you know, I'm an impulsive person. I love like plans and go and just do it. And, you know, it's forced me to slow down, and it's forced me to be less impulsive and to be way more present. And that really helps with stress also. Like we're talking breath by breath, like, you know, you don't have to do everything in that moment. Just taking a breath. You're dehydrated, you have a headache. And oh, another thing that I think that sometimes we in our culture is, you know, our body speaks to us, right? So the way our body is meant is when we feel pain, when we feel, much like the stress response is initially meant to kind of kickstart us into survival mode. Like when we experience symptoms, and I was just reminded of this, like when I think about hydration, you know, because I used to be like, oh man, it's so much work staying hydrated, like every day. So much water to drink
Every day.
Every day you start over. Like you can't just like drink those, you know. And it's like when you fall behind, I just see all that water that I didn't drink. It's like, oh,
You can't bank it.
you can't. It's not like, oh, tomorrow I won't have time and I'm going to be driving, so I'll just, you know. But like your body, you know, be aware and pay attention to the symptoms that your body is feeling, as opposed to just like, oh, I have a headache, I'm going to just take some Advil. Like, you know, kind of being a bit more curious about what your body's trying to tell you, because symptoms exist so that our body can communicate, you know. So
I definitely noticed that I know already that I grind my teeth at night, so I wear a night guard, but I've been clenching a lot during the day, and I'm not going to be wearing a night guard walking around in the afternoon. And I know I'm doing damage to my teeth and my whole jaw, my neck, everything gets sore. And every time I think about it, because I've been like studying myself, because it's a crazy thing, I think that like it's a frustrating because I can't control it, and I catch myself doing it and I stop, and then like 4 minutes later I'm like and doing it again. But I have noticed that if I keep a journal of when I am the most stressed and when my jaw hurts the most, and if I kept a journal about how much water I drank, they're totally they're totally a team. Like lack of water equals more tension.
all things, it's just like that's your, you know, breath, water, like basic needs. I think stress management, we could really dumb it down to like, are my basic needs being met? Am I breathing? How am I breathing? You know, when you do body scan and you just kind of check yourself out, where are you storing that tension? So like you're talking about your jaw. When I used to teach prenatal yoga, I used to always remind the girls that tight jaw equals tight hoo-ha. because the jaw is intricately linked with your whole pelvic system. So, and we store a lot of our stress and emotions in our hips. So for you, maybe doing some hip releasing tension postures like pigeon and that sort of thing, and like really sitting in those postures. And those are postures of like there's often an emotional release that comes with the, you know, especially if you go into a yin practice.
Yep.
So, and when you're in those postures with the hips, notice what your jaw is doing also, because it is I mean, we're so linked, this is connected to this and, all that stuff. But anyways,
breath by breath.
Breath by breath.
I like that. I think that's going to be the title of this video. Thank you so much, Cindy, for joining me today and helping educate the world about mental health, empowering people. I feel like everything you do empowers people. When you play music, people relate. It empowers people. When you do people's taxes, that empowers people. When you're doing what you're doing now, it's so empowering. And I'm really proud to know you, and I love you a lot. Thank you.
I loved you. And I also want to thank you for setting this up and having these really important conversations. I think that that's like the first step for all of us to just kind of destigmatizing everything associated with mental health and the awareness. So everything you just said to me makes me want to cry, because I love that you're in my life and that, we get to have these conversations together and learn from each other. You're the best, and I love you.
I love you too, Cindy Doire. I'm gonna
just throwing flowers at each other.
Ah.
I think our parasympathetic system's definitely being activated.
I love you.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for tuning in. You're the best. Mwah.
Mwah. I'm gonna let Cindy go. Ciao, Cindy.
Ciao.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm gonna post a bunch of stuff on my stories about little things that you can do to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. And yeah, Mom, I know you were wanting to learn some yoga, so hopefully you learned a little bit about the importance of bringing it back into your body. Thanks for being here. Thank you for listening. Thanks for watching. We have one more talk tomorrow with Shalavit Simcha Cohen, who is in Israel but spends most of her time in the UK. And they're going to tell us about PosiFest, a positive festival that anyone can attend. I am all the mess. So are you. We're in it together. My name is Melanie Brule. Thanks for tuning in. These are mental health talks and breath by breath. Ciao.